Good morning. Thank you for joining. My name is Jasmine Hooper. I'm just going to give people a few seconds to join in. Welcome to the FISA Making College Success webinar. My name is Jasmine Hooper, and I serve as the director of the Fostering Youth Success Alliance, also known as FISA, at Children's Aid. FISA is a New York State advocacy group that promotes responsive policies and programs that offer young people with a foster care background every opportunity to set higher expectations and achieve their goals. As a former foster youth and graduate of both Columbia University and Spelman College, I hold these issues near and dear to my heart. Our youth in care are facing unparalleled challenges during COVID-19, including how to navigate distant learning and stay on track at school. During this webinar, we hope to highlight the need for greater connectedness, communication, and compassion during these times. Joining me today are two outstanding advocates. We have Claudia Williams, who is a sophomore at Buffalo State, SUNY, where she is studying criminal justice. And Claudia has also served as a FISA youth advocate since the fall of 2019. Also joining us is Jenny Pekempner. Jenny is a senior attorney at the Juvenile Law Center, where she focuses on issues related to older youth and young adults in the child welfare and juvenile justice system. Her areas of expertise include permanency, extended foster care, and education success for transition age youth in the child welfare and juvenile justice system. We really appreciate having Claudia and Jenny as presenters today and give special thanks to the Schoolhouse Connection and Foster Club for contributing some of the data and resources you will hear more about today. So we're just going to go over today's agenda. Today on this webinar, we will detail how to best help foster youth think through and plan their housing options, access supports both in person and remotely, develop contingency plans in case of campus shutdown, and ways to keep healthy while having a successful school year. Just a few housekeeping rules. Everyone will be in listen-only mode during this webinar, and if you have any questions, please use the Q&A feature. Please refrain from using the chat box. We will monitor your questions and address them at the end of this presentation. This presentation will also be recorded and available on the Making College Success Resource Guide website. We will post all of the slides, resources, and materials covered during this conversation. So, navigating the new normal. How are our youth doing? So according to Foster Club in a recent nationwide study in May of this year, unfortunately, as a result of COVID, our youth in care are facing housing instability, they've lost employment, and are dealing with food insecurity. Only 37% of our older youth in the system have at least one family member that they can rely on, so they are especially hit hard during these times. As you can see in the slide, many young people share that their housing was tied to their schooling, and that was taken away as a result of COVID. So these are the findings from the recent study from Foster Club. Now, I would like to introduce Claudia Williams, who will share her thoughts and perspectives as a college student navigating distant learning during the pandemic. Claudia, will you please join us and unmute yourself?
Hello, everyone. My name is Claudia Williams. I'm a sophomore here at Buffalo State College, majoring in criminal justice. And today, I just wanted to share some of my experiences through distant learning since COVID happened. Personally, I am not really good with distant learning. I would like a physical connection with my teacher, verbal connection with my teacher as well, class engagement with my other students and staffs, and so on and so forth. Distant learning has been very challenging for me because, you know, as of right now, some teachers are like, just do whatever you want. So I find that very inconvenient, and no shame to the teachers or the professors here at Buffalo State, but I feel like you know, we are advocating for ourselves, but we also need them to help us, you know, because you can only imagine like all the work and the challenges faced on students each and every day. I feel like not having a structure or not having like a class date set in time, like we're gonna meet this day or at this time, is very inconvenient, because you know, doing whatever we want is just like we're teaching ourselves. We need professors to teach us. That's what we're paying for, you know. So we're just literally like turning in work whenever the due date is, and that's just not okay. I find like it's important to be connected with students. It's important for the teachers to just take a step beyond, because on distant learning is like really really hard, and you can only imagine someone's household and how difficult that is. Stepping in with kids in foster care, you know, you can only imagine how hard that might be for them. You know, they have like all these other challenges they're facing at home, and then for them to get online, they might not have all the technology that they need, not all the resources that they need, and that's just another challenge that they have to face on a daily basis. So I feel like the my professors could be more like proactive. For example, I have one professor where he teaches us on a Zoom class every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. He sends us emails like, this is going to be due this day. He sent us a reminder like we have classes day, and so on and so on. Like if more professors could be that way, it would be very helpful for a student. And yeah, it's also very hard here at college because we of social isolation. COVID has stopped us from, you know, being together with all of our friends. We can't do anything, you know. And me playing rugby, that was like my outlet to work out, my outlet to just be around my friends, and I can't do that anymore because of COVID. So you know, campuses can do more with like trying to get students involved more and trying to help students meet other people virtually and things like that. It's very hard for a student to just, you know, work, juggle schoolwork, juggle their household. You know, it's just very like distant learning is very, very hard.
Thank you, Claudia. I really appreciate you sharing your perspective. Um, so, what can we do? Um, as Claudia shared, this is a very challenging time for some of our youth in college who reported that they often feel alone, like Claudia highlighted. She was used to being able to socialize with her friends and do rugby and have a more balanced life. And youth are reporting that they're sometimes feeling overwhelmed managing all the aspects of their new normal by themselves. So to mitigate a stressful situation and prevent our youth in care from slipping through the cracks, we encourage everyone to practice the 3 C's: connect, communicate, and compassion. And I would like to add a 4C in there to communicate: constant communication or constant connection. When we say connect your youth directly to helpful services and programs rather than just sending them the information or the contact, and follow through with the youth afterwards to make sure that they did indeed access that support or that service that you feel would be appropriate for them at this time. Also, connect with your team so that you're not shouldering this process on your own. I know we're all dealing with a lot as higher ed and as child welfare staff and advocates. And the best way that we can make sure that we're able to still meet the new and ever-changing needs of our youth is to make sure that we're also connecting and taking a collaborative approach. Second C, communicate. Reach out more than usual. Our youth in care have shared that they welcome and appreciate it when adults check in with them more frequently, on a more frequent basis. So as Claudia highlighted, she has a professor that really stands out to her because that professor has constant communication. I'm sure that professor has a lot on their plate, but they understand the value in checking in with the students, making sure that they're reminded of deadlines and assignments that are due. Also compassion, which I'm sure we all on this line have, but we want to make sure more than ever that we remember to have compassion for ourselves during these times and with our youth. So although technology makes it fairly easy to maintain connections, students need our unconditional support more than ever. We're going to talk about just the best practices and the approach that we would like to lift up when working with students from foster care. So we always want to consider the student's background and circumstances, make sure we remember our trauma-informed approaches. There are abrupt and frequent changes in students' life. So we want to make sure that we're keeping that in mind, and also remembering that these are youth that really don't have much adult guidance. And even if they do, because of COVID, a lot of youth have reported that sometimes they're unsure on which adults to go to for which services, or they don't want to be a burden. So that's why we want to make sure that when we are talking to our youth and we're connecting them directly to services, that we also want to follow up to make sure that they actually did use those services. So to further detail the tips and strategies, I would like to turn it over to Jenny Kempner, who will present several tips for how those of us in child welfare and in higher ed can best support our staff during this time. So Jenny, will you please unmute yourself?
Yes, thanks so much, Jasmine. And I apologize, everyone. The slide movement that was done too quickly in the beginning was my fault, so I apologize for that. And I'm just trying. Again, I apologize for my technological skills. Kenny, I don't know if you're able to. It looks like I have lost the ability to move the slides. If you are able to.
I can move it, Jenny.
Okay.
I can move it.
All right. Thanks. So as Jasmine said, this is kind of building on the 3 C's, and I think we really do want to make sure these maybe are the biggest things you leave this webinar with is this approach. Many of you on the phone are on this call are already doing this, but really emphasizing the need to be as proactive as possible. And I think when we were preparing for this, we talked about like connecting and being, the person who does the warm handoff. And then I think we started talking about it as being the person who's actually the bridge, being the person that's introducing the youth to the resource or the person and helping them connect, and then making sure they connected, and asking questions to the student to make sure were they able to connect with the service, how is it going, and also taking the opportunity of those more frequent connections to ask more questions to the young person about how they're doing. As Claudia said, young people, all of us are a lot more isolated. You're not seeing people as much. Even when you see them on Zoom, you may not see those cues that would normally maybe push you to ask an additional question, so that we kind of have to be more on our toes about asking more, how they're doing, how they're feeling, are they eating, do they have enough food, asking, I mean, Claudia, the example of the rugby is excellent, like what are you doing to kind of take care of yourself for stress release, to see peers, and help them figure out when the answer is not much or I'm not sure, help them do those things and be that bridge that helps them kind of solve that problem. And wanted to remind people, if you do want to chat during the session, ask us some questions, please feel free to do that as we're moving forward. And so one of our first tips, again, this kind of is consistent with the approach that you use, is that we do really want to make sure that young people do have the safe, affordable placement housing so that they are able to focus on their education. And so it is really important to make sure, especially now, that young people do have a place to stay. And if it's on campus in dorms, do they feel safe there? Are there any additional assistance or supports they need to make sure they feel safe? And then if they are not on campus, make sure that they have again, safe placement or housing, and that it is that they have funding for that. So if you are working with young people who are in extended foster care, the child welfare agency should be paying for that and assisting young people with that. But given a lot of the changes kind of during COVID and the pandemic, you might need to help with some of that advocacy. So we really encourage you to do that. And then for young people who were in foster care but aren't in extended foster care anymore, really helping making sure if their grant aid doesn't cover housing, which hopefully it does, but if it doesn't, that we help access affordable housing. And clearly that's always a challenge, so something that we need to be thinking about kind of in advance, but definitely be helping the student if you find out that that's an issue. The FYI program is one of the programs that might be available in your jurisdiction to help with subsidizing housing, but there certainly are other programs as well that you want to tap into. But if young people don't have that safe, secure housing, and I know you all on the call know this, it really makes it very difficult to be successful in school because it's just too much instability and stress. Thanks, next slide. And then I think for most of you on the call, and many of you are on higher education campuses, so you know about the campus student supports, but definitely did want to make sure that people were thinking about not just connecting young people with the student support programs that have always been there and are always valuable, but really being, again, a little more proactive than usual about making sure youth are connected, and also thinking about things that, again, young people who may not have the support of family might need your extra support on. Again, thinking about being the bridge that connects the youth and then kind of sticks with the youth as they're connecting with that service and hopefully receiving it. And so one service or support we wanted to flag, and again, I think is familiar to a lot of you on the call, is supports that a young person would get through the Office of Disability, and that probably is called different things on different campuses, but a lot of times it is a change for young people who might have had an IEP in high school to realize that that IEP doesn't transfer with them, and also that the campus may not necessarily, an Office of Disability won't reach out to them and find them. And so this is one of those examples of where it's so vital for you to walk with the youth. And I know we're not maybe walking out during on the campus, but walk with them to access, request these services, whether it's a 504 accommodations plan, if that's something the youth needs. And then to be mindful that we do, and again, many of you on the call are these people, probably are these point people, is that there are a lot of people at the schools that can really help the young person connect to services. And some of them, like the foster care liaison, have great expertise in the foster care experience. So if they are on campus, can be these great allies. But again, sometimes a young person may not know they exist, or the foster care liaison may not know of that young person. And that, again, advocates on the call, supporters, mentors of a youth, you can be that kind of bridge and connector, and then really stick with it and make sure that connection's been made. Next slide. And then this next tip is one that probably you all don't need, because the issue of access to technology and the right kinds of technology and equipment is something that's been with us since the spring. But we did just want to remind everyone, because we have seen with a lot of young people, and some of the variations will depend on kind of where they are living. If they're living in their own apartment, if they're living in a group home or a foster home, that we do want to be mindful of asking kind of some of that nitty-gritty technological and equipment question to make sure that youth have what they need. Some of the things I think we found in the last couple of months is asking questions like not just do you have internet, but do you have internet that will accommodate what you need for your school, for either your classes or the homework and assignments you need. So if you are living in a household that has multiple people, is the bandwidth sufficient? If you're living at a place where there might be some limitations on kind of internet access and you need to access things like YouTube and watch videos for class, make sure that any restrictions are lifted and make sure those are everything's in place for the young person. And then again, we're always thinking about online now, but you do need, I think, printers, they need paper, notebooks, and again, many youth might have these things, but thinking about that and asking those questions, those are the kinds of questions a parent or support network might ask, and just don't assume the youth would have those people there, and many of you on the phone can help play that role. Next slide. And then unfortunately, as many of us, all of us on the call have seen, that there definitely have been changes in plans for schools in the last couple months or so. So we do have to have contingency plans in place with young people, and housing and where they're going to live might be one of the most important things to have in place for a contingency plan. And so I think that we all want to be, I know on the call you all are in different roles, helping make sure that some kind of contingency plan is in place for the young person. What will they do if they're living on the dorms and then the dorms need to close? What will they do if they need to find completely alternative housing? And then for youth who have been able to do some of their learning in person, dealing with all the things that we've been going through just about shifting to remote. And so I think that if you all on the call can be making sure that youth you're working with have a plan, or that you're connecting and making sure a plan is in place, I think that is really important. Because one of the things I think we've seen, and as Jasmine talked about the 3 C's, the compassion, also, one of the roles of compassion is really understanding what the experience of a young person in foster care might be. And while COVID has been traumatic for everyone, a lot of the things we've heard from young people is how some of the things around COVID have been triggering past experiences, have been really bringing up things in their past. And you could see how like a closure and being told you got to move quickly, being in a situation where you don't know where you're going next can really be exacerbating existing trauma. And so one of the reasons we really do want to emphasize having this contingency plan is really to help mitigate some of the feelings that are going to happen no matter what, because I think these shutdowns and changes are scary for all of us and for young people, but thinking about how those additional stresses might weigh on a youth in foster care and what can we do to reduce that. So how can we plan with them so that it doesn't hit them as hard? Next slide. Thanks. And then I think we've continued to emphasize, that making sure young people are really connected to the array of things that are on campus and in the community. And Jasmine's going to talk about the guide, which really divides a lot of the supports in a really nice way, so you can kind of run through, okay, well, how do I think of community services in the community? How do I think of campus services? And how do I help a student connect with those? But we do want to make sure that that we're reminding students that even if you're learning remotely, there are so many things on campus and that they are being delivered remotely as well. The challenge is that you're not walking over to the tutoring center. You're going to have to take some steps to connect the student with those things. And just again, remembering that, connect, communicate, compassion, that tell the student about it. Explain why it's important, help them connect, then follow through, help them follow through. And this is, again, a skill that all young people are developing, but in COVID, I think it's more important for us to walk with them and do that follow-up. And then I think we want to think about what excellent services are on campus, and there are so many that the student needs and would be supportive anytime, but then thinking about what might be, are there new supports that the young person needs based on these changing environments? Are there things based on learning remotely? You know, as Claudia said, it can be really tough for a lot of students. For many students, that's not the ideal way to learn. And if that's the case, what additional supports might be helpful? Does a young person need more study skill support because like the time management and kind of adjusting to learning by yourself in a room by yourself, not with a classroom full of people? Are there study skill support that maybe can add to that? Time management, things about again, checking in more. Claudia had an excellent teacher, and maybe one of the students you're working with doesn't have a teacher that's doing that, but could you make that request? Or could the tutor who's working with a young person do some of those reach outs? So I think really trying to figure out what services do you need anyway, you know, as a matter of course that you might have needed before COVID that accommodate how you learn, but what other supports might be necessary now that there are these changed environments, and then thinking about things that would be considered emotional or social support. Again, Claudia's given such great examples of what are some of the supports that young people relied on to really keep themselves going. I mean, clubs, connection with peers, and how can you help them find those replacement experiences. Again, they may not be equivalent, but things that would really help them gain both peer support through campus, but also through the community, as well as support that might be behavioral health services. If COVID is really triggering a lot of trauma that a youth experience, and there might be a need for more or different behavioral health services, helping them do that so that those feelings and that stress doesn't overwhelm them in a way that impacts their studies negatively. Next slide. And then we just did want to flag this quickly is that, you know, for youth to stay in extended foster care in New York State and in almost all states, they need to be doing something. And there's multiple things you can do, but often the young people you are working with are, if they're in extended foster care, they're meeting that school requirement. And we just did want to remind people is ideally the work we're doing in this webinar and the work we're doing in general is to keep young people in school and keep them really flourishing and thriving during COVID. But if you are working with a young person who that isn't possible for whatever reason, we just did want to highlight that the Children's Bureau, the Federal Child Welfare Agency, has told states that they can be flexible in these school and work requirements. So we just do want to make sure that students have that advocacy. If for some reason they can't maintain enrollment, that they get the advocacy. So if that occurs, that they still have the support of extended foster care and continue to receive those supports. Again, we hope that doesn't need to happen, but just want to make sure people are aware of that youth should not be being pushed out of extended foster care, even if things don't go as we'd like with school. Next slide. And then I think, Jasmine, I'll pass it back to you, and we look forward to your questions and also hearing from you about kind of what you guys have seen and what tips you would share with the community that's on the phone.
Thank you, Jenny. And just a reminder for folks, you all can submit any questions that you have so far in the Q&A box. So again, Jenny really detailed some really great tips, and I just want to quickly go through some additional 3 tips that can be helpful and will make a meaningful difference in the lives of students. So definitely work with your students. This is for child welfare staff and for higher ed staff. Right now, there's a lot of crucial deadlines that affect students. For example, I've had students that have unfortunately missed deadlines on pass-fail grading, which would have been helpful as distant learning has been such a challenge for them. So there's a lot of anxiety around how deadlines will have a residual effect on the youth's grades and their GPA overall. So a lot of anxiety around grades. So we want to make sure that us adults that are supporting these youth are communicating with the youth as much as we can about deadlines and about decisions at drop period, withdrawal period, policies around credit versus no credit and incomplete classes. This is a very actually crucial tip, and it will help us prevent our youth from slipping through the cracks, as unfortunately some youth have already reported to myself and some of my other colleagues that they have already began to do that. So we really want to make sure that we're working very closely with students on this, and explaining how these deadlines and decisions will affect them. A few more tips. Tip number 8, we definitely want to make sure that we're working with students in determining cost of living options. Some of you may have youth who live on campus, who lived off campus. They may be in a placement, or they may have their own apartment. They may be dealing with some job loss, and as we know, a lot of our youth that are currently in care and that have been in a home placement for at least 6 months didn't qualify for the stimulus package, so they weren't receiving that funding to help mitigate some of the costs that they may have incurred or debt as a result of job loss. So we want to work with our students to ask them, you know, how are you covering your rent, or how are you covering your living expenses? Are you able to afford groceries? And this is, you know, for our child welfare staff and for our higher ed staff. And we especially want to pay attention to our youth who have aged out of care, because they're in that area where they may not have a caseworker helping them with these decisions. So we definitely want to keep an eye out for that. And the last tip would be, this is for child welfare staff, but also for maybe those foster care liaisons and the financial aid advisors on the campus. Be sure to double check that your campus or the campus that your student is at offers coronavirus relief, aka the CARES Act funding, as that money is funneled directly to the students to support them if they have any unmet financial needs due to COVID. So those are 3 additional tips that I really wanted to lift up. Also, again, we all have so much on our plates. I know there's so much going on in the higher ed space and the child welfare. And again, the best way to really address these issues with our youth is to take a collaborative approach and to be proactive, patient, and of course, persistent. My colleague, Jenny, just, you know, in a conversation earlier reminded me that, like, to take an approach as a parent would. A parent doesn't stop reaching out even though the youth may not be as responsive to certain types of outreach efforts. So we also want to be creative. If one way doesn't work, we want to try another. And just more so on the collaborative and the teaming approach, I really want to highlight for our folks in the higher ed sector and in the child welfare space to really be in communication with one another, particularly for the youth that are in care currently. I encourage the college support staff and the youth advocates at the child welfare space to get in contact with your student's financial aid advisor or with their academic advisor at the campus and make sure you two are working collaboratively to ensure that your youth are meeting their academic goals. Because again, there are oftentimes scholarships, funding, eligibility for extended foster care is tied to a student's enrollment. So we want to make sure that we're working together on that. Also, you can visit Schoolhouse Connection for more resources, a more detailed list on these tips, more detailed explanations on these tips for a separate list for higher ed and child welfare on this website. Hopefully someone will drop it in the chat. And I'm sorry, I'd like to also highlight our Making College Success resource guide. This is a tool that is designed for all of you on this line, child welfare, foster youth, higher ed folks specifically, and really anyone who's working with youth in care in college to support your students. The Making College Success Guide contains information and tools to help support post-secondary educational success. I encourage you to explore our guide where it has chapters on child welfare in New York, financial aid resources specifically for foster youth. We have an entire list of the scholarships that are available to youth in New York. It has the deadlines, it has the requirements. It's a very helpful resource. We also have resources specifically for our child welfare folks, community resources, and we detail in Chapter 6 our campus policy recommendations. I know my colleague Jenny Kempner lifted up that, having a foster care liaison on your campus. If that's something that you're on the line, your campus doesn't have, our Chapter 6 of the guide on the policy recommendations details what that campus liaison role should be, or why it's necessary to have someone like that on campus. So I encourage you all to explore the guide. Also, I'd like to lift up, we had a webinar series detailing how to use our guide, detailing the chapters, and you can find recordings of those webinars that we had over the summer on our website as well on the guide. So you can find webinars 1 through 5 on there. And while we get ready to answer your questions, we would appreciate any feedback that you have about this presentation. If you would participate in our poll. So I've lost the poll. There are only 3 questions. We would ask you to please rate your satisfaction with this webinar. We asked, how likely are you to use the tip sheet and or the College Success Resource Guide in the future? And will you share information about the webinar with your colleagues, staff, and partners? So while you complete the evaluation, we will answer a few of your questions, and a reminder that we'll post a frequently asked questions document on the FISA website, as we have with all of our previous webinars. So Maria, will you check in with the questions that are in the Q&A?
Yes, we had a question. It is, can these supports apply to students attending college outside of New York State?
I'm sorry, you said, can the supports?
Can these supports that we're covering in the webinar apply to students attending college outside of New York State?
Jenny, would you like to answer that question, or would you like me to answer it?
I'm happy to start. And I think it's a great question, and if we have some non-New York people, I think yes, absolutely. Most states, most campuses across the country have student support programs and have an array of campus supports. So I think what you want to do is, if you're in a state outside of New York, or you're working with youth who's at a particular school, is do some work looking at their website, and you've kind of learned maybe some of the categories of support that might help you with that search. Things that have to do with maybe, is there a foster care student support program? Not all schools have that across the country, but certainly they're growing in most states, so there might be. All campuses are going to have, and many of you on the call who are higher ed experts, I think we're looking forward to your thoughts too, but are going to have a lot of these supports: tutoring, study skills, counseling, probably activities like affinity groups that you can connect young people with. So I think you can take the services that we've highlighted, and really you probably can identify them on campuses across the country. But I think it would be great. I mean, what we'd really love you to do if you're working with a student is help them identify those by doing a little research. One of the really nice things about the guide, even though this is focusing on New York, is it gives you, if you look at the chapters on community-based services and campus-based services, it's going to give you an idea of what that menu tends to look like. And that might help you if you're doing that research and you're in Connecticut and your young person is in college in Connecticut. You can kind of use some of that information to do that research with the youth and connect them. So I definitely think you'll be able to find these supports across the country, but your help in looking and helping these identify them would be, like, I think, really vital and really important. And then of course the approach we're talking about is something you can use you know, across the country, and we hope you will, but definitely the services. As Jasmine mentioned, the link that we have to Schoolhouse Connections has 2 tip sheets. It actually has 4 tip sheets, but the tip sheets I'm going to mention to you all are related to higher education. And one of the things we did when working with them and developing them is one we developed that's kind of generic and can be used kind of in any state, but we also developed an editable version so that if you were in Connecticut, if you were in New Jersey, I should pick a Western state, if you're in Oregon, you could take that form we developed and it prompts you to fill in your state information so that you can, with doing just a little bit of research, maybe create an Oregon specific fact sheet. And if people are interested, if they're here from other states, we're happy to help you do that. But we definitely want to make sure people in every state are helping students do that, to get the support. So if we can help you do that, New York has a ton of services, which is awesome. I know we always want more, but definitely a great example of a state and universities and colleges that have invested in this population, but always want to build more supports.
Thank you, Jenny. Thank you so much. I think we have another question, Maria.
Yeah, so a couple of folks have asked where they can get a copy of this excellent presentation. And so I thought it would be good to remind people about where they can find all of the webinar recordings and materials.
Absolutely. Thank you, everyone, for that question. So on the FISA website, and I think Maria will drop in the chat box the link to our website. On FISA's website, you will find a tab titled College Guide. That's where you can find the entire resource guide. You can download it for yourself. You can download it, print it, share it with your colleagues and your team. But also on the table of contents page of our guide, you will find a recording of this webinar as well as our webinars 1 through 5. And we hope to have that up maybe by tomorrow, if not by Monday of next week. So, you know, thank you for that question. And again, you can find always all of our frequently asked questions, our slides, and our recordings on our Making College Success Guide website. And again, I just want to remind you all that we do have our webinar evaluation poll up. This information, it helps us to create our webinars and to know what's helpful. So we really appreciate if you all would participate in that poll. And I don't think we have any more questions at this time. If you do have, please put it in the Q&A box. But I would like to highlight an upcoming event that we have. We have our College 101 panel for prospective youth with a foster care background next Friday at 3 p.m. This is youth focused, so this webinar was for you higher ed and child welfare staff, but this College 101 panel that we have next Friday is for our youth. So if you're working with high school youth that are preparing to go to college across New York State, we invite you to share this wonderful panel with them. We will have panelists from CUNY, CUNY's ASAP and Foster Care Initiative. We will have the directors of that sector of CUNY on the panel. We'll have a wonderful director of, I believe, academic advisement at SUNY Stony Brook will be on that panel. And we will also have our Foster Youth Success Alliance directors from the CUNY and SUNY sector on the panel, along with some youth, some students that will be able to share their perspectives. So it's going to be a great panel where your youth can get all their questions answered. So just wanted to highlight that. Registration is required, and Maria will drop this link that you see right here in the chat for you to share this wonderful opportunity. So our thanks to the presenters and to all of you for attending today's presentation. We really appreciate it, and we know that you all will do great work with this information that you received today. Thank you so much.